The night was cold and the wind carried dust through the broken streets. The human sat alone in his small shelter, eating the last piece of bread he had saved. The fire was weak, giving little warmth. He thought the night would pass like all others, quiet, lonely, and hungry. But then he heard a sound outside, light footsteps and the scrape of something against stone. He froze, listening carefully. The noise grew closer until a shadow appeared at the doorway. It was a little girl. Her body was thin, her cheeks sunken, and her clothes torn into rags. She was not human. Her skin carried a pale shade that shimmered faintly under the firelight, and her eyes glowed a dull silver. She looked no older than 8. She stood trembling at the threshold, too weak to step inside, too desperate to walk away. The human stared at her, unsure what to do. In this world, strangers often brought danger. Still, there was something in her eyes that made him stay seated instead of reaching for his weapon. The girl's stomach growled loudly, breaking the silence. She hugged her belly with both hands and looked at the bread in his hand. He hesitated, thinking about how little food he had left. If he gave it to her, he would be hungry tomorrow. But if he didn't, she might collapse right there in front of him. Slowly, he broke the bread into 2 pieces. He held one half toward her. For a moment she did not move, only staring at him as if unsure whether it was a trick. Then, trembling, she stepped forward, snatched the bread, and stuffed it into her mouth with shaking hands. She ate so fast she nearly choked. He passed her a cup of water, and she gulped it down. The fire crackled softly between them as he watched her. Her shoulders relaxed little by little, but her eyes never left him. When she finished, she licked the crumbs from her fingers like a starving animal. "Where did you come from?" he asked gently. She said nothing. Her mouth opened once, but no words came out. Instead, she looked toward the door, fear in her silver eyes. It was as if she expected someone to come chasing after her. He wanted to ask more, but he saw how thin she was, how her small bones pushed against her skin. Questions could wait. He pulled an old blanket from his bed and held it out. She hesitated again before taking it. Wrapping herself tightly, she sat near the fire, watching him as though he was still a stranger who could turn dangerous at any moment. The human felt uneasy. Why was she alone? Where were her parents? Why had she come here, to him? His shelter was nothing special, just stone walls patched with wood, but she had walked straight to his door. He wondered if she had been watching him before, waiting for a moment to ask for help. Minutes passed. He offered her a second cup of water, and she took it silently. Her hands shook as she held the cup, spilling drops onto the floor. She looked smaller now, wrapped in the blanket, almost like a shadow of a child. Something twisted inside him. He remembered times when he had gone hungry, when no one had helped him. He did not want her to feel the same. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, broken, almost like a whisper. "Thank you." The words were simple, but they struck him deeply. She had an accent, strange and unfamiliar, but the meaning was clear. He gave her a small nod. "You're safe here," he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Safety was rare in this world. The girl sat for a while longer, staring into the flames. Then, without warning, she stood. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. She walked toward the door slowly, her bare feet silent on the floor. He rose halfway, alarmed. "Wait, where are you going?" She stopped, but did not turn. After a moment, she whispered again, "I can't stay." Before he could stop her, she stepped into the darkness outside. The night swallowed her whole. He rushed to the door and looked out, but she was already gone, vanished into the ruins like a ghost. The human stood there, the cold air biting his skin. He felt the emptiness in his stomach, the loss of the bread he had given, but he also felt something else, unease, curiosity, and a strange pull in his chest. Who was she? Why had she come to him, and where would she go now, so fragile and alone? He returned to the fire, but could not sleep. All night long, he replayed the image of her silver eyes in his mind. He told himself she was just a stranger, a lost child, and that he had done what he could. But deep down, he knew it was not the end. Something about her felt unfinished, like a story that had only just begun. By dawn, he sat awake, staring at the empty doorway. The little girl was gone, but he could not shake the feeling that she would return. And when she did, he feared his quiet life would change forever. The knock came when the sun had already sunk behind the broken skyline, and the world outside his shelter was drowned in shadows. The human stiffened, his hand reaching instinctively for the rusted blade at his side. Few ever visited him, and none after dark. The knock came again, softer this time, almost hesitant. He stepped to the door and pulled it open. There she was, the same little girl he had fed days before. Her silver eyes reflected the dim glow of his fire as though they carried the light inside them. She looked a little stronger, but her thin arms still clutched the blanket he had given her. This time she was not alone. Behind her stood a woman, tall but frail, her face lined with exhaustion and shame. Her skin carried the same pale shimmer as the girl's, but her body trembled under the weight of carrying nothing but rags. The girl looked up at him, and for the first time her voice was firm, though quiet. "Please, let us in." The woman's head bowed, and he saw the bruises along her arms. Her eyes avoided his, filled with both pride and despair. For a long moment he said nothing, caught between instinct and pity. Letting them in could bring trouble. Rumors spread fast, and people in this place had no kindness for outsiders. But the memory of the girl choking on bread, the sound of her stomach growling, pressed hard against his heart. He stepped aside. The girl tugged at her mother's arm, guiding her into the warmth of the fire. The woman's legs nearly gave way, and he hurried to pull a chair forward. She lowered herself onto it, her body shaking as if every breath was a battle. The little girl crouched by the fire, her eyes brighter now. She smiled faintly, though it faded quickly when she noticed her mother's condition. He brought what little food he had left, a small pot of thin soup. The girl ate eagerly again, but this time she paused, breaking pieces with her hands and offering them to her mother first. The woman resisted, shaking her head, but the child insisted. At last the woman accepted a bite, tears slipping down her cheeks. The human sat across from them, his chest heavy. He was already counting the food in his storage. 2 mouths had now become 3, and his supply was barely enough for himself. Yet, when he looked at the girl's glowing eyes, wide with gratitude, he found he could not regret it. When the silence broke, it was the woman who spoke. Her voice was hoarse, low, as if speaking cost her strength. "You should not have helped us. Others will see. They will talk." She coughed and leaned forward, her thin frame shaking. "If they find us here, they will punish you too." He met her eyes for the first time. "I couldn't let her starve." The woman lowered her head again, ashamed. She whispered something in her own language, then caught herself. With effort, she said in broken human tongue, "We leave tomorrow." The little girl shook her head violently. "No." Her hands gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Please, Mama. No. He saved me. He will help." Her mother's lips tightened, but she had no strength to argue further. She only sighed, pulling the girl close against her. The human felt the child's small hand still clutching his arm, as if letting go meant falling into the darkness again. Outside, faint voices drifted on the wind. Neighbors gathering, whispering, always watching. He knew they would soon notice the strange figures entering his home. The weight of their suspicion pressed against him like a storm waiting to break. The fire burned low, and the shadows grew long. He saw the girl drifting into sleep on her mother's lap, her thin body finally at peace for a short while. The woman stroked her hair gently, her own eyes heavy with exhaustion. She glanced at him once, her expression unreadable. Gratitude, fear, and something else. A silent question of why he had risked himself for strangers. He had no answer, not even for himself. He only knew that something had shifted inside his quiet, lonely life. The night no longer belonged to silence. The fragile sound of their breathing filled the room, and with it came a strange warmth. But under that warmth, unease grew. He knew the world outside would not allow this peace to last. The days that followed were heavier than he had imagined. Every morning, the human measured his food supply with a careful hand, watching it shrink too quickly. The little girl always ate with wide eyes, smiling at every bite, while her mother pushed most of her share away, pretending she wasn't hungry. He noticed the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking, the way her body weakened more each day. She was starving herself so the child could eat. At night, when the fire dimmed and the girl slept, the woman often woke in silence, her face turned to the wall, tears glistening on her skin. He heard her whisper in her own language, broken sounds that carried pain he could not understand. One night, she finally spoke to him in words he recognized. "I shame myself. I cannot feed her. I cannot protect her. I am no mother." Her voice cracked. She pressed her hands over her face. He sat across the room, staring at her through the firelight. "She's alive," he said slowly. "That's enough. You brought her this far." The woman shook her head, her pride breaking. "No, I am only a burden to you. Tomorrow, we leave." He felt anger rise, though not at her. "If you leave, she dies," he said. The words hung heavy between them. She looked at him, searching his eyes for cruelty, but there was none. He had spoken the truth, nothing more. The little girl stirred in her sleep, as if she could sense the tension. She reached blindly for his hand and grasped it even while dreaming. He froze, then closed his fingers gently around hers. The woman saw this and lowered her eyes. For the first time, she did not argue. Outside, life was growing dangerous. Whispers carried through the ruined streets, talk of aliens hiding among humans, stealing food, spreading sickness. His neighbors lingered near his home longer than before, their eyes sharp, their questions sharper. One man stopped him in the street, asking if he had seen anything unusual. The human forced his face to remain calm, answering with a steady no. But suspicion had already taken root. He felt it in the way the market sellers looked at him, in the silence that followed when he entered a room. He began to walk with caution, always checking behind him. Inside the shelter, the little girl filled the space with laughter that sounded out of place in such a bleak world. She played with small stones, pretending they were treasures, handing them to him with pride. "For you," she would say, her silver eyes shining. He accepted each one as though it was gold. The woman watched these moments quietly, her face softening even as her worry deepened. Food grew scarcer. He cut his own meals in half, giving more to them, but even that was not enough. Hunger gnawed at his body, but he said nothing. When the girl noticed, she offered him half of her portion one evening. He smiled and pushed it back toward her. "Eat. You need it more than I do." She frowned, but obeyed. Her mother watched silently, her expression heavy with guilt. One night, the woman finally broke the silence again. "They will come," she said, her voice low. "They always come. They take us, lock us away, or kill us. You put yourself in danger by keeping us here." He looked at her, his face hard but calm. "If they come, I'll deal with it." She stared at him as if he were a fool. "Why? We are not your people." He did not answer right away. He glanced at the child, curled up in the blanket he had given her, asleep with her treasures of stones clutched to her chest. Then he turned back to the mother. "Because she smiles when she eats. Because you still fight to keep her alive even when you're breaking apart. That's reason enough." The woman closed her eyes, her shoulders trembling. She said no more. That night, as he lay awake, listening to their breathing, the human knew something had changed. They were no longer just strangers in his shelter. They were part of his days, part of his silence, part of his hunger. He had taken responsibility for them without meaning to. And though the world outside grew darker and more dangerous, he found himself thinking less about survival alone. He was thinking about survival together. The first sign of danger was the sound of boots on the cracked pavement outside his shelter. The human stiffened, pressing his back to the wall. Voices followed, low but sharp, echoing in the narrow street. Soldiers. Their patrols had grown more frequent in recent days, but tonight their tone carried something different, hunger for discovery. He peeked through the broken slats of the window. 3 soldiers walked slowly, their rifles gleaming in the dim light. One of them carried a lantern that cut through the shadows. They stopped near his door, speaking to each other in hushed voices. He couldn't make out every word, but he caught enough. Aliens. Hiding. Report. Behind him, the little girl stirred. She blinked awake, confusion in her silver eyes. Before she could speak, he pressed a finger to his lips. She froze, eyes wide. Her mother, already awake, clutched the child and pulled her close, her body trembling. The human could see the fear in her eyes, but also something else, resignation. She had expected this moment. The knock came, loud and commanding. The human swallowed hard, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Who is it?" "Patrol," a rough voice answered. "Open the door." He glanced at the mother and child. The girl buried her face into her mother's chest, shaking. He knew if the soldiers saw them, it would be over. Not just for them, for him too. His mind raced. The room was small, with nowhere to hide. Only one choice remained. He moved quickly, pulling a loose board from the floor. Beneath it was a shallow crawl space he had once used to store supplies. He gestured urgently. Get in. The woman hesitated, her pride clashing with fear, but the girl pulled at her hand, desperate. Together, they squeezed into the space, the human covering them with the board once more. He scattered old rags and wood over it to mask the gap. The girl's silver eyes shone through a crack for one last moment before vanishing into the dark. The knock grew louder, harsher. He forced himself to open the door, his face blank. The soldiers pushed past him without waiting for permission. Their boots thudded against the floor as they scanned the small shelter. "You live alone?" one asked, his eyes narrow. "Yes," the human replied calmly. The lantern swept across the room, lighting every corner. His heart pounded, each second stretching into eternity. The soldiers searched under the table, behind the stacked wood, even beneath his bed. One kicked at the old blanket the girl had once used. The soldier's eyes narrowed. "Strange. We've had reports of outsiders near here." The human shrugged. "Plenty of strangers in these ruins. I haven't seen any." The silence that followed felt like a blade pressed against his throat. Finally, the soldier grunted and gestured to the others. "We'll keep watching. Don't get in our way." When they left, their boots echoing down the street, the human closed the door slowly, his breath shaking. He dropped to his knees and pulled the board aside. The girl crawled out first, gasping for air. Her mother followed, her face pale, sweat running down her temple. She stared at him with something fierce in her eyes. Not gratitude, not yet, but something closer to disbelief. "You risked your life," she whispered. He shook his head, still catching his breath. "I risked nothing. They didn't find you." The little girl clung to him, her thin arms tight around his waist. "They would have taken us," she said softly. "You saved us." He placed a hand on her head, his chest heavy with the weight of what almost happened. He realized then that this would not be the last time. The soldiers would return. The whispers in the streets would grow louder. The woman sank onto the chair, her hands covering her face. For the first time, he saw her pride collapse fully, leaving only fear for her child. She murmured, "You cannot hide us forever. They will come again." He looked at the girl, still clinging to him, her silver eyes filled with trust. Then he looked at the woman, broken but unyielding. He knew she was right, but he also knew one thing with certainty. He would not let them be taken, even if the whole city turned against him. The night they came again, there was no warning. The sound of engines roared through the ruined streets, brighter lights sweeping across the broken buildings. The human's heart dropped when the beams cut across his shelter. He grabbed the girl's hand and pulled the mother to her feet. There was no time to think, only to move. The door rattled as fists hammered against it. "Open up!" a soldier shouted. He ignored it, pushing open the back exit he had prepared long ago. The girl stumbled as they ran, her bare feet striking against the cold stone, but she never let go of his hand. Behind them, the door gave way with a crash, shouts rising into the night. They slipped into the ruins, weaving through collapsed walls and burned-out vehicles. The mother fell once, her legs too weak, but the human caught her before she hit the ground. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms, her body shockingly light. The girl's tiny fingers clung to his sleeve as he urged her forward. The sound of boots and engines grew louder behind them. Gunfire cracked through the night, sparks dancing against the walls. The girl screamed, covering her ears, but he pulled her along, his mind racing through every path he knew. The city was a maze, half dead, half forgotten, but he had lived here long enough to know its shadows. He darted into narrow alleys, ducking beneath collapsed beams, always moving, never stopping. The mother whispered through ragged breaths, "Leave me. You can still save her." He glared down at her, his jaw tight. "No." Her eyes widened, but she said no more. She clung to him, her pride silent in the face of his stubbornness. They reached the edge of the ruins, where the city gave way to broken fields littered with ash. The patrol's lights swept across the rubble, voices calling out, closer now. He shoved the girl into a narrow crack between two stone walls. "Stay low. Don't move until I tell you." She nodded, her silver eyes wide with fear but full of trust. He shifted the mother on his shoulder and moved again, drawing the soldiers farther away. Shouts rose as beams of light found his shape, but he ducked behind a shattered vehicle, pulling the woman down with him. Bullets struck the metal, ringing in the dark. She gasped, clinging to him. "Why do you do this?" she whispered, trembling. "We are not yours." He looked at her, his face set in steel. Because no one else will. The chase pulled on, every second sharper than the last. His legs burned, his chest ached, but he refused to stop. When at last they slipped into a hidden tunnel beneath a collapsed factory, the silence around them felt unreal. The world above continued to roar with engines and boots, but down here, only their breathing filled the air. The girl crawled in after them, throwing herself into his arms the moment she reached him. She buried her face against his chest, trembling with relief. He held her tightly, feeling the weight of both her and her mother pressed against him. The mother leaned weakly against the wall, staring at him as though seeing him for the first time. "You carried me," she said softly. Her voice was a mixture of wonder and shame. "No one ever has." He did not answer. His arms ached, his lungs burned, but inside his chest something stronger than exhaustion kept him steady. The girl lifted her head and whispered, "We are safe now, right?" He looked into her eyes and forced a nod. For now. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Safety was only temporary. As long as they stayed with him, the danger would never end. And yet, as he felt the girl's arms tighten around him and saw her mother's tired eyes soften in the flicker of the torchlight, he realized he could no longer imagine sending them away. They were his to protect now, no matter how far he had to run or how many enemies came chasing through the night. The days in the tunnel passed like stolen time. The human found scraps of food from hidden caches he had left long ago, sharing them with the mother and child. Hunger gnawed at him, but he never let it show. He watched the girl eat slowly now, no longer swallowing like a starving animal. She broke pieces of her bread and pressed them into his hand, stubbornly refusing to eat until he did. The mother grew quieter, her sharp pride dulled by exhaustion, but not gone. She sat often against the wall, watching him with unreadable eyes. Sometimes she spoke in her own tongue to her daughter, soft words that carried comfort, but when she looked at him, there was always hesitation. One night, as the fire burned low, she asked him in broken human words, "Why do you stay? You could leave us, live free." He poked at the fire with a stick, the flames throwing shadows across his tired face. "Because you'd never survive without me," he said simply. She shook her head, almost bitter. "No one binds you, yet you choose this weight." He glanced at the girl, asleep with her small treasures clutched in her hands. "Some weights are worth carrying." The mother said nothing after that, but something in her eyes changed. When the girl woke the next morning, she laughed for the first time, chasing a rat that scurried across the tunnel floor. Her silver eyes glowed in the dim light, and she shouted, "Papa, look!" The word froze him in place. He had not told her to call him that, but it slipped from her lips naturally, as if she had always believed it. The mother looked at him sharply, but instead of anger, there was only silence. The girl began to cling to him more with each passing day, reaching for his hand whenever they walked, leaning against him when she grew tired. At night, when shadows pressed too close, she whispered, "Don't leave." And he promised, every time, "I won't." Slowly, even the mother softened. She began to speak more, sharing fragments of her past. She told him of villages burned, of soldiers taking men away, of mothers hiding children only for them to starve. She confessed that she had once believed humans were cruel by nature, yet here she was, alive because of one. Her voice carried both shame and disbelief. In return, he told her little of himself, but she noticed the way his voice grew hard when he mentioned other humans. He was alone by choice, perhaps even by necessity. Still, now he had allowed two strangers into his silence, and it was reshaping him. The girl, unaware of the weight pressing on the adults, filled the air with small joys. She gathered smooth stones, lined them carefully on the floor, and declared them jewels. She made games out of scraps, laughed when the human pretended to lose. Even the mother's lips curved into rare, fragile smiles. But under the warmth, tension never vanished. The human felt it each time he left the tunnel to search for food. He walked carefully, keeping his head low, listening to the whispers that followed him. The patrols grew more restless, searching harder. Neighbors still watched his shelter above, asking questions he had no answers for. The world was tightening around them. One evening, when he returned from scavenging, he found the mother waiting at the tunnel entrance. She stood tall despite her weakness, her silver eyes sharp. "You cannot keep us hidden forever," she said. "Soon they will find us." He carried the bundle of food past her and set it down, his voice calm. Then I'll keep moving you. As long as I'm alive, they won't take you. She stepped closer, her voice low. But why risk everything? We are not your blood. He met her gaze steadily. Blood doesn't decide who's worth saving. She stared at him for a long time, her lips parting as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, she looked at her daughter, who was humming softly to herself in the corner, and something in the mother's face cracked. For the first time, her eyes softened fully, stripped of pride and fear. That night, as they shared the thin meal in silence, the human felt something unspoken settling between them. They were no longer just survivors hiding in the dark. They were beginning to feel like something else, something dangerous in a world that wanted them apart. They were beginning to feel like a family. The soldiers came at dawn, their voices carrying through the broken streets like thunder. The human woke instantly, his hand tightening around the girl who slept beside him. The mother's eyes opened too, and for a long moment none of them moved. The air itself felt heavy, filled with the sound of marching boots. He rose quietly, pressing a finger to his lips. The girl's silver eyes blinked wide, fear already swimming in them. She clung to him without a word. Above their tunnel, the shouts grew louder, orders barked, weapons clattering, the unmistakable scrape of metal against stone as doors were broken down. They were close, closer than ever before. The mother grabbed his arm, her voice shaking. "We can't run this time." The girl shook her head violently, tears filling her eyes. "Papa, don't let them take us." Something hardened inside him. For weeks he had tried to stay hidden, to keep them safe in shadows, but shadows were no longer enough. They wanted the mother and child. They wanted to erase them. If he gave them up, he could walk away alive, but the thought of handing over the girl who called him Papa made his stomach twist like fire. He stood, pulling both of them to their feet. "Stay behind me." The tunnel echoed with the stomping of soldiers' boots. A lantern light shone through the cracks above, cutting the dark with strips of fire. He could hear the commander's voice barking, "Search everywhere. The alien and her spawn are close." The mother trembled, whispering, "You don't have to do this." He turned, his face grim but steady. "Yes, I do." When the soldiers finally forced their way into the tunnel, rifles raised, they found him standing in the center of the passage, body shielding the woman and child. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the troops poured in, their weapons glinting. One of them shouted, "Step aside, human. Give them to us." The girl gripped his shirt, her voice breaking. "Papa." The human's jaw tightened. He raised his hands, but not in surrender, his fists clenched like iron. His voice rang out, steady and defiant. "If you want them, you'll have to go through me." A stunned silence fell, the soldiers hesitating at his tone. No one defied them, not openly, not like this, but he stood firm, broad shoulders blocking their view of the trembling figures behind him. The mother's breath caught, her silver eyes fixed on him, filled with disbelief. The standoff stretched on, the soldiers unsure whether to strike. The human's heart pounded, but he refused to step aside. For the first time since all of this began, he realized he had made his choice long ago, back when he gave the starving girl half his bread. He wasn't just hiding them anymore. He was theirs. They were his family now. The lantern light flickered across the tunnel walls, shadows dancing around them. The little girl pressed her face against his back, whispering through her tears, "You won't let them take us." He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes meeting hers. "Never." The soldiers began to move, weapons shifting, but the human stood tall, his stance unbroken. Whatever came next, whether it was a fight, a sacrifice, or something far worse, he knew he would not run. He would stand. He would protect them. And in that silent moment before the storm broke, the mother understood. She looked at him, her fear melting into something fierce, something unshakable. For the first time, she whispered words meant only for him. "Then we stand with you." The sound of rifles being cocked filled the tunnel. The battle for their lives was about to begin, but the human no longer felt alone. He had found something greater than survival, and he would not let it go, not even if it cost him everything.